Dear listeners, I'm thrilled to announce you can now pre-order the paperback edition of our book, Think Like a Vegan. This highly anticipated release will be available in the UK and worldwide from January 2025 and in North America from April 2025. It'll contain a new afterword, so you can dive into updates and new material you won't find in the hardcover. Don't miss out on this opportunity to enhance your understanding and commitment to veganism. Pre-order your copy today wherever you buy books or on Amazon or Target, and join us in thinking, living, and thriving like a vegan.
This is another iRaw podcast.
Hi, I'm Emilia Leese, and welcome to the latest episode of Think Like a Vegan podcast, a companion to our book, also entitled Think Like a Vegan. When you hear the term zoonotic disease, what does it mean to you? What do you think of, and who's responsible for them? Maybe you think about COVID-19. How about HIV-AIDS? Is your impression that zoonotic illnesses are something relatively new or uncommon? In this episode, I want to explore just how far back zoonotic illnesses go and think about how our entanglement with other animals affects us and them on a cellular level. So, what's a zoonotic disease and how do they spread? Zoonotic diseases happen when pathogens spread between non-human animals and human animals. Our using animals as commodities has facilitated pathogens jumping from animals to humans. The close proximity to one another of animals living in farms means pathogens have an easy time multiplying among animals kept captive and not in their free state. And I'm not talking about so-called free-range enclosures, because those are cages too. In turn, their proximity of infected animals to people working in farms means pathogens have the opportunity to eventually mutate to such an extent they can make the jump from one animal to us. Because, remember, we're merely just another animal. And before you think, oh yeah, that's because of factory farms or wet markets, zoonotic diseases can come from any type of small or large farm, any type of market, or any slaughterhouse. And they have. Pathogens jumping between non-human and human animals began millennia ago, when agribusiness wasn't industrialized. It's simply that industrial agribusiness has made contagion worse and faster. We talked about the distinction without a difference between industrial and small-scale agribusiness in episode 3 of this season. So that's the very basic what and how. Let's turn to what are some examples of zoonotic diseases. Do any come to mind? And in what animals did they first develop? There are a variety of zoonotic diseases. Some are rare and obscure, while others are familiar and common. And their farmyard origins might surprise you. For example, measles, tuberculosis, or TB, and smallpox. Those are zoonotic diseases with origins in pathogens affecting cows. They developed well before there was anything remotely like industrial agribusiness. And then there's the flu, influenza. That virus, or I should say all those viruses, they have their origins in pathogens affecting pigs, ducks, and chickens. How about malaria? Yep, that's a zoonotic disease which kills millions of people each year, especially children. The origin of malaria is in pathogens affecting birds, like chickens and ducks. And you've heard of pertussis, or whooping cough? That one has its origins in pigs and dogs. And all of these diseases I just mentioned have reached pandemic proportions at various times in human history, causing untold suffering. Some even wiped out entire indigenous populations. sometimes accidentally, and other times maliciously on the part of colonizers. So, how do we react to zoonotic diseases? Zoonotic diseases aren't new, and each time they occur, we don't think about the farmyard origins of these diseases. We just accept their existence as an inevitable fact and never reckon with the responsibility we have in facilitating their existence. And then we face each new zoonotic illness as something we can't avoid. But we could. We could put a stop to new zoonotic diseases if we didn't use animals as commodities. This is within our control. And whenever zoonotic illnesses come up, we minimize them. And what do I mean by minimizing them? Think about how we classify certain diseases like measles or whooping cough. We call them childhood diseases, as if they were just child's play, when what that phrase really means is you've got to survive those to make it to adulthood. Of course, today we have the benefit and protection of vaccinations, and that's great. Since 1940, almost half of the zoonotic diseases emerging in humans resulted from changes in land use, farming, and wildlife hunting. Today, in addition to agribusiness animal origins, some pathogens emerge from free-living animals. For example, HIV-AIDS is believed to have originated in chimps and spread to people through consumption of infected bushmeat. And, as we know, COVID-19 may have originated in wild animals being sold alongside agribusiness animals. So now let's shift our thinking from animals infecting us to simply focusing on us and our behavior and habits. How else are we complicit in the development and spread of these diseases? And what about our responsibility when our actions wreak havoc in free-living animal populations? We'll explore these questions after listening to Pingli by Matthew Gerstenberger, aka Seismicity, and you'll find him on SoundCloud. Matthew says this piece is all about textures and happy vibes. We're all in some way complicit in facilitating the existence of new zoonotic diseases. The one obvious way is we continue to exploit animals and create ideal conditions for these types of pathogens to multiply and eventually make the leap to humans. Animal agriculture brings us into close contact with animals in an unnatural and crowded environment. Then there's demand for animal products, which exacerbates deforestation and environmental degradation. In turn, this brings animals and their pathogens out of the forests and into contact with people. And all that antibiotic use by animal agribusiness, because, believe me, they use unimaginable amounts, that eventually builds up and the pathogen's resistance to antibiotics. And I don't really want to imagine a world without effective antibiotics to you. And then there's one of my most cited reasons for a lot of things, including our unwitting complicity in zoonotics, the non-vegan capitalist world we live in. And I know you've heard me say this numerous times. Global economic systems have turned everything into a commodity at ever-increasing speeds, including wild animals. Whether it's because of necessity or greed, people search for new things to sell. Even if these products were traditionally sold without any problems, the speed and quantities by which we're creating new commodities means more wild animals and other forest products are being bought and sold. and that means more and more opportunities for new contagions. And is it enough to limit our concern over zoonotics only when they affect people? I don't think so. The current pandemic of avian influenza H5N1 shows us limiting our concern is too narrow an attitude. Whether because of ethics or simply for our own self-preservation, we should also be concerned with the wider health of animals. What happens to them may be a harbinger of what happens to us. Simultaneously, with concerns for our health and from an ethical standpoint, we must take moral responsibility when our farming practices cause devastating diseases and pandemics within animal populations, whether wild, domestic, or on farms. You might be surprised to hear H5N1 was first detected on a chicken farm in Scotland in 1956. And note that date. It's before the intensification of farming, or really just on the cusp. Then in 1996, it reemerged in southern China in flocks of domestic waterfowl and subsequently in poultry when this sector was industrializing and expanding rapidly. That flu outbreak infected more than 860 people with a greater than 50% death rate. Since then, H5N1 has mutated and spread among birds and other animals, and it's absolutely everywhere. Asia, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, the Americas, and even the Arctic. Everywhere with registered cases of H5N1. This bird flu has now killed over 131 million birds in animal agribusiness worldwide, including over 100 million in the United States alone. It's unknown exactly how many in the wild have succumbed to H5N1, but it's believed to be in the millions. And you absolutely shouldn't be surprised to hear H5N1 has also infected 27 species of mammals, including mink, and millions were culled on a fur farm in Denmark, bears in Canada, a polar bear in the Arctic, seals and sea lions all across the world, foxes, lynx, polecats, bobcats, otters, skunks, and badgers. The threat to biodiversity is undeniable. And so far, in the United States, 163 dairy herds have been infected. And that number keeps rising. When I started writing this episode in late June 2024, the number of dairy herds affected was 51. Here we are in July 2024, and it's 163. The U.S. has also registered infections of goat kids and alpacas who were living on a farm with infected chickens. And in terms of human infections, since 2003, 23 nations have reported H5N1 influenza infection, including the United States, China, India, Russia, Hong Kong, Mexico, Senegal, England, Cambodia, Vietnam, Spain, and Ecuador. Among these infections was the first infection from contact with infected dairy cows. Between the 1st of January in 2003 to the 3rd of May in 2024, there were a total of 889 cases of human infection, with conditions ranging from asymptomatic to critical. Of these 889 cases, 463 were fatal. That's a 52% case fatality rate. This rate matches the mortality rate I mentioned earlier from the 1996 outbreak in China. And I've seen this very scary number being cited in many articles, but we simply don't have enough information to know that would be the case overall. I am not by any means minimizing the seriousness of infection, but I'm also careful about catastrophizing because it undercuts credibility when it's most required. In any event, we should absolutely take it seriously because H5N1 is in fact a highly contagious pathogen. It can survive in contaminated soil and water. When birds come into contact with the virus, whether directly or in secretions of infected birds, they die a slow, agonizing death by suffocation. Think height of COVID-19 without oxygen and respirators. The disease presents suddenly, often with very high mortality, with affected birds developing swollen heads, a blue coloration of the comb in poultry, and the wattles, dullness, lack of appetite, respiratory distress, diarrhea, and significant drop in egg production. There's no known cure or vaccine for H5N1, and that's why when the virus is detected in flocks of birds or other animals on farms, they're all immediately culled, usually through mass suffocation. And even if we could vaccinate domestic and animals in farms, it would be nearly impossible to vaccinate or cure wild animals. Currently, although the public risk to people is deemed to be low, the European Commission's Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority has secured 665,000 pre-pandemic vaccine doses of the up-to-date zoonotic influenza vaccine Seqirus, as well as an option for a further 40 million doses over the duration of the 4-year contract. Now, is this preparedness or is this a business deal for the more cynical amongst us? Frankly, it's probably both, and that's where we are. Is this the most downer episode I've ever written? Maybe it is, because the facts, recent and historical, are grim. But we've got to have grown-up conversations about what we're doing. We need to confront our actions not only to save animals, but also to spare ourselves the potential of great suffering as a result of diseases and the loss of biodiversity. Avian influenza and other zoonotic diseases I've mentioned exist and spread because we continue to choose to exploit animals for food. We must advance our discussions of veganism and of transitioning animal agribusinesses to plant-based farming, ecological restoration, and other nature-based businesses. We must strive for an equitable world and an economic system that looks after people, animals, and all of nature. We must join and foster international solidarity, demanding a fair production process with equitable profit sharing, fair wages, and good living conditions for all people. We have to organize and muster the political will to create solutions. It's in our interest for long-term, not just survival, but to thrive in a world fit for us, our descendants, animals, and all life as we know it. When we go round, we burn things up. When we go round, we speed things up. When we go round. That's it from me, Emi Leese. Thank you for listening. Remember, you can get in touch by email at thinklikeaveganbook@gmail.com. You can find more of my work and upcoming events on my website, emilialeese.com, and social media. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with others, and leave us a review. And buy a copy of Think Like a Vegan anywhere you buy books and audiobooks, or request it from your local library. Production credit goes to Jim Moore of Bloody Vegans Productions. Theme music provided by Jenny Moore's Mystic Business from the eponymous album. The opening tune is Flashbacks, and we close with Tear Things Up. The interval music is by Matthew Gerstenberger, aka Seismicity, on SoundCloud.
For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.